Welcome. I'm going to attempt to walk you through installing MidnightBSD in VMware Workstation. I'm a bit new to this particular product. I have used the Mac Fusion product a lot, so we'll see where we get with this. So you're going to pick the MidnightBSD ISO that you downloaded from the website, and I'm using the AMD 64201 release for this example. This is the first time I've done install video in quite some time, so a lot of people wanted an updated one. So you can name this whatever you want. I'm going to call mine MidnightBSD. Okay, I did do a test earlier, so if I say MidnightBSD2 here, you're going to pick how much storage you want. For a desktop, I tend to do 50 gigs and a single file. We're also going to customize hardware. So let's say 4 gigs of RAM. You don't necessarily need that much, but I tend to like it. 1 or 2 gigs is more than enough. I'm also going to give it multiple processors and turn on the virtualization feature because my CPU supports it. I have an AMD Ryzen processor in the host system here. So I've just picked stretch with keeping aspect ratio, so you guys should be able to see this a little better. And we're booting into the installer. So since I'm in the US, I'm going to pick the default key map here. You can choose other ones if you're kind of in different regions. Now I'm going to show you how to get an updated ports tree and also to check out source code. So I'm going to leave those two blank, but source is useful if you're going to install an NVIDIA binary driver, for example, or something like that, and you need to build it from source. And mports, if you're not going to update your ports tree, you can get those from the disk. It does take a while to install. So there's UFS and ZFS options here. I'm going to try ZFS actually, so I don't think I've ever done a video on installing that way. And you can kind of see we have a single disk, so we're going to pick Stripe and just pick our VMware disk here. And then it will destroy everything on the drive, so keep that in mind. You don't want to blow away, Windows install you need or something like that. And they should install pretty quickly. Just put in a test password there. And since we're running VMware, we're going to just do DHCP. This is also normally what home users would typically use. Not everybody has IPv6 at home, so if you do, turn that on. But in my test case, I don't have it. In here, we'd pick our time zone. I happen to be in Michigan, so I'm going to pick that one. You can adjust the time if you need to. For desktop use, I usually recommend turning off Secure Shell. Multicast DNS, you only need if you're going to be interacting with other things that are shared with, Bonjour, Rendezvous, whatever marketing term Apple settled on. If you have Apple devices in the house, this can be useful. Some file servers and NASs also kind of identify themselves with this, or printers, so it can potentially be useful, and that's why it's default on. But in this example, we're going to turn it off. We're also turning off power D since this is a virtual system. If it was physical, you'd probably want that enabled. And we're going to turn off send mail because it doesn't really make sense for a virtual machine in a desktop. And now we're going to add a test user. So you're going to want to add the user to the wheel group so that they can get root access. That's a really important step when you're creating a new user for yourself. And you can pick your default shell. I do recommend MK shell as a default user shell. TC shell is also a good choice in this list. If you want bash or Z shell or something like that, you'll have to install it from ports and then change your shell later. And again, I just put in a test password. And you're going to want to use a secure password for your own system. You just type yes at the end. It creates the user, and then you can make another one if you want, or you can end. In this case, I only want one test user, so I'm going to quit. And that's the last step in the process. So we kind of, if you want to make local changes, this is useful if you're doing RAID controllers or you have some weird boot setup or something, or you want to change some kernel modules or something. But normally you just pick no and then reboot. And then I would go down here and pick I finished installing, like that. And then this guy reboots. And then we're booting into the OS for the first time. So BSD Stats reports your hardware and software configuration to a third party. It is really helpful for me as a developer to know what hardware people are using, to know what to prioritize. But there, some folks have privacy concerns about this, so make a personal decision on that. I'm going to say yes to show you how it works. And normally for a desktop, you would not pick periodic reporting, and you would just pick yes on reboot. Now, as far as the graphical environment, that's like the desktop environment. There's a known bug in this 2.01 release. There's a typo in this script. So just choose no. And then we're going to try logging in with our test user. And that worked. And then I can get root access with SU. And if I go here, I'm going to type port snap fetch extract, and this is going to download the ports tree for me. This is optional, so some people only like to use packages, but I like to have the ports tree on the file system even if I'm installing from packages, because it's easy to like kind of look through it and see what type of stuff I might want to install. And every once in a while there'll be a package that doesn't work, and this is a good way to kind of get through that and manually install it. Or an update that I want, that kind of thing. You can see that this is port snap 1. There's 3 different port snap mirrors. It kind of round robins randomly with DNS records. So port snap 1 is the server in like where I'm at. Port snap 2 is the AWS mirror in Virginia, and then port snap 3 is in London in the UK. So they're usually pretty fast. You can see this is extracting pretty quick. So now there's an imports directory with all of our stuff. And then if we wanted to update that later, you would do fetch update, and then that would go out and see if there's changes. And in this case, there aren't. So that's cool. Another thing you can do is if you want to do packages, you would first run memport index, and this would download the latest index file from the MidnightBSD website. And you should really do this whenever you're going to install packages and it's been a few days or a week or a month or whatever. I'm not super consistent yet about package installation, but I'm working on that. But we're usually averaging 2 weeks to a month for new package builds. They tend to be more frequent right after a release too, as I work out bugs with different packages with the new OS. So I just got a new batch of packages yesterday, in fact, for AMD 64. So I can do something like MidnightBSD desktop, and we'll go through and install a bunch of stuff. And this is not perfect. There are bugs with the package manager currently that are known, mostly with how it handles dependencies. So every once in a while you get a weird error that something's missing, and if you just directly try to install that something and then go back to what you were doing, it'll work. It's frustrating and not very user-friendly, and I'm aware of it. But that's something that we really need to improve in the project. And that's the reason that we don't do all of the desktop GUI install from the ISO yet, is because the package manager needs work before we can do that. So you can see this is a bit time consuming, and I'm local, and there's quite a few packages here to download. This will install a lot of different things though. You'll get Samba, you'll get Window Maker, you'll get part of the Xorg packages. Unfortunately, several of the ports require specific compilers right now, so there's a lot of, I need GCC7, I need LLVM4 for DRI, which is quite frustrating. That one in particular drives me nuts. So we need to port LLVM8 in the ports tree before we can upgrade our OpenGL stuff. So Mesa, basically Mesalibs, MesaDRI, all those things. So we're on an old version, so we have to use an old LLVM release for that. And some of these dependencies were there because in the previous MidnightBSD release, the system compiler was really old. So we find a compiler that it worked with, and we would just use that. So that's why you have LLVM 7 and 4 both getting installed, as well as GCC 7. And sometimes GCC 6. So that's a project that we have kind of ongoing, is to go back and clean up some of those dependencies, or make them at least specific to the 1.2 series. As we drop support for that, we can just get rid of it entirely. Now, there's a couple of critical things that you really do need to do once this is done. It's imperative before you try to start X Windows that you get dbus and HALD started, or else your mouse and keyboard won't work. And that was something that we had gotten rid of, the HAL dependency, in the previous MidnightBSD release, and unfortunately in 2.0 we had to bring it back. This is a bit tedious, mostly downloading. You can see it just got Window Maker installed. The other thing I'd like to talk about is the base system has a couple different editors installed. There's VI and EE. VE is more user-friendly, and VI is more of a power user editor. There's also Ed for people that are really power users. You know, a lot of people don't like any of those, and they'd prefer using Emacs or Vim or Nano. Those are all available in the ports tree, as well as Bash. So, as far as shells go, so you know, a really common pattern would be for people to install Bash and Emacs or Bash and Nano, depending on what your experience is. And we can see we did get an error message due to some of the dependency stuff that I mentioned earlier. So if we install Bash now, we can finish installing the desktop. So now we're done. So you can see if we do import list that we do have a lot of things installed. We'll install HAL. Debus should already be there, but just checking. Now we go in here. And we can turn on in the xfce.conf, we can enable both of those, and then do service dbus start and service ld start. Or you can just reboot the computer. So that gives us HAL and dbus, and then we may also want to install mlogin-d, which is kind of like, it's a login, graphical login manager. So you can get, it's kind of like Slim. So it has a default kind of MidnightBSD theme. So go in here and enable that too. So this is again in xfce.conf. Before we reboot though, we may want to set up a so exec wmaker will start window maker when we run startx, or we do a login interactively with mlogin-d. So that's the xinit.rc file. This is kind of again the old way to do this, but you can do per user configuration like this, and then it'll start up your favorite desktop environment. So at this point, there's one more thing that we probably want to install. So you can use the doas command, which is kind of like sudo, and you want to install, since this is a VMware environment, we're going to install the Open VM tools. Okay, and then there's a file that this installs in user local xfce.d, which is where we have all of our startup scripts. So you can see that we have VMware guest D. So we want to do VMware guest D enable equals yes. Oops, I didn't use do as. Okay, and then we can reboot. You can kind of see that's booting up slowly. Interestingly, mlogin-d did not start up correctly, so let's check that out. Okay, so it looks like the Xorg, some of the Xorg video stuff didn't get installed. So if we do import install Xorg, that installed all the video drivers and so on. Better, now we have a login shell. So I can log in as me, and I can do an xterm, and say I want to browse the web. Could start Midori, which is the web browser that we installed, and I can put this in my dock over here, and it will be available in the future. Then I can hit the web, the window bigger here. So you can see the MidnightBSD website, or you can hit Google. Now there are other browsers that you can install, so you could do Firefox. You also need to install this port. For some reason it's not included in the Firefox port right now. And then you should be able to run, that's a 1 by the way, not a 0, or a L. Now you can run Firefox. I can also drag this to my dock. So then I have a browser. And there are other things you can of course install. So you can do as import install gedit. Helps if you type your password correctly. And I can run gedit. And so on. You can install Xfce. That one's a pretty big dependency, grab, but it would just be do as import install Xfce. Go through and get all that stuff. And I just realized I have not shown people how to get the updated source code, so let me do that. There are a couple different ways to do this. So user source is empty. So one thing you can do is you can do svnlite it's MidnightBSD slash source dot get slash something like this. Helps if you do checkout CO. And this will go through and download all the source code. It can be very slow. Xfce just installed. I might be blanking out on the URL for this. Another thing you can do is you can install Git, which is probably the right thing to do. Which actually also happens right now to install the full version of Subversion because of the Git SVN compatibility. So we used to use Subversion for the project and we moved to GitHub in the last year, and it is actually easier to use Git for certain things. So I believe that would be you can just do this, which is a lot easier. And I remember the URL for this. You can get the Subversion URL from the GitHub, website. I have it documented somewhere, I think on a MidnightBSD site also. But you can see this is downloading. So this is initially going to download the master branch though, which is not what most people want. That's the current development version of MidnightBSD. You can see it's a pretty big repository. So this is going to take a while. We do also generate tarballs, I think, of the source code on the server, like the FTP server. If you wanted to do Xfce, if you look at user local bin, and you look at the different tools, there's one in here that's called Start Xfce 4. So that is the name of the program that you need to run Xfce. So what we could do then is we could edit our xinitRC file. I'll comment this one out. And then next time we start up, we'll actually be in Xfce instead of Window Maker, which is pretty cool. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. This is done. It's amazing how slow checking out from a Git repo can be. This is with a gigabit internet connection. It is a virtual machine, so it's not going to be a speed demon. But anyway, what you would do once that's checked out is, as the root user, you would do, you could do git branch to see what branch you're on, and it would show that you're on master, and then you could do git checkout stable 2.0, I believe it is, and that will give you the latest 2.0 branch, and then you can, compile that to get updates. And you can also install some of the, like, say you want sudo. You could do import install sudo. Maybe you hey do as. And then it mentions the configuration that you have to do. So then you've got sudo, so you can do, sudo bash or something if you wanted to get a root bash shell. Now you can see that this failed, and so the first thing we would do is we would edit the sudoers file, and we'd go in here, and you can do specific users, but we actually want to enable it for the wheel group. You can do no password if you don't care about security that much, but at that point you might as well just be the root user. And you make that change to enable the wheel group, and then I can do sudo bash, and that'll give me a bash shell as root. You can also do sudo -s, which will give you a root shell also, but not as bash, of course, whatever your default shell is, and so on. And that's taking an incredibly long time. Another command I want to show you is import clean, which again I should run as the QS. So you can see that this cleans up the import package database. And it also deletes some packages that you might have in the system that are out of date. So if you have like really stale versions of stuff, it'll go through and delete those. There's a directory called vardb import. And in here, you have the import index. So if that ever got corrupted, you could just delete it in here and then run the import index command to get a new one. The master DB, which is actually where it stores all of the information that import tracks for your system. So if you do as import list to see what you have installed, it would pull it from the master database. And you can open that up as a SQLite file. And there's also downloads where it actually downloads all the packages. So this is actually where they are in the file system if you ever want to, grab them or delete them or whatever. They do take up a lot of space, so once they're installed, it's usually pretty safe to delete them from there. And the infrastructure folder, I believe, is just some of the configuration data about the install. So yeah, that's pretty much it. You can also see the PortSnap databases in vardb PortSnap. If you decide you don't want to use PortSnap anymore, you can delete that whole directory and delete user imports and be done with it. So you can see that Git's done, so we can just do, as I said earlier, you can see Git branch. There's some configuration stuff with less that you need to do to make it not do the escape character thing. If you're not going to be using Git a lot, it's not worth messing with it. You can just do that, and it will take a few minutes because there are differences. And now you're unstable. So if I run git branch, boom, I'm on there. You can look at the updating file and see MidnightBSD 2.0.2 is now in Git, which has a bunch of improvements, like 150 of them, in fact. So you can you could, do make build world, build kernel. If all that stuff works, you could install kernel, reboot. Well, you should theoretically do merge master -p first, and then reboot on it. If it works okay, install world, merge master, and then you have a new OS. That's pretty much it. Let's see if we can get that Xfce working real quick before I end the video here, just to show you guys that part. And we'll just use the default panel. And boom, look at that, we're in Xfce, which I find a lot more user-friendly. So, I can go in here and there's, my terminal, got file manager, web browser, all that stuff. So you can see my default browser right now is Firefox, so boom. And it also has the nice applications menu, which I find more user-friendly, which is actually showing some of the apps that we have installed. And there is another app you could try that I didn't mention earlier. If I run this guy, this is actually a graphical package manager. So you can actually go through and find out what packages are available. And this just uses that import index. And you can also, I can click on BSDI and it will tell me the license and a description. And there's an install button. You can also see installed software, and you can uninstall from here. And there's also the updates. So if there was any updates available, I could hit the upgrade button. So that is another way to use imports. So, maybe I want to, mail editor. So there's a couple of things in here like GNU Mail, which is built on GNU Step. There's a Thunderbird port, I guess. There's Evolution, which I have been using personally quite a bit lately. It's actually gotten pretty good in more recent releases. So those are all options for you. And you can, of course, log out or shut down or whatever you need to do. So pick shutdown. And that's it. Thanks for watching.